Hello and welcome. You're in for a treat tonight. My guest is Michael Dennis Browne, the famous, well-known Minnesota poet, and I am telling him he's a bit of a philosopher too. He's also a man who has written the words for some of Stephen Paulus's work, a librettist, and he is an author of some children's works, as well as some essays about poetry. You've won the Minnesota Book Award twice for a collection of poems, and your work with Stephen was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. So it's wonderful to have you on as a leader in the world of literature and
happy to be here with you, Mary.
Writing. You came from Ireland when you were about 25?
Actually, I came from England, but three of my four grandparents were born in Ireland and emigrated to England.
Oh, okay.
So I'm English born, but I left England 50 years ago to go to Iowa City.
And why Iowa City?
Because it's the most famous writing town in the States.
Well, that's
Well, it was.
And so you knew that as an English boy.
Yes.
Okay.
It was recommended, and I managed to go there, and it changed my life.
So you loved it there.
I loved it, and until recently I'd go back every summer for a week to teach in the writing festival.
I read that.
And go around my old haunts, you know. But I just met so many wonderful writers there, and I loved America right away. And so
did you leave all your family behind to do this?
I left them all
That's
behind.
a big decision.
It was hard, and as the years go by, it seems harder because I've got grandnephews and nieces who I see every 2 or 3 years. I go back as often as we can, but I miss their lives.
Yes, you do.
So there was a great loss there, but when my sister-in-law tells me, as she did recently, we went north for Christmas to see our son, and we saw the sun for the first time in 3 months. I'm glad I immigrated, because I couldn't live under those gray skies.
So good things, bad things.
Yes. I love our climate here.
Did you have a professor, Michael, at Iowa that was a mentor that took you under his wing or her wing?
Well, there were several wonderful poets when I went there. Donald Justice, famous poet, was there. Marvin Bell, who became a friend. Paul Engel, for a while, who was one of the founders of the workshop. Those are 3 poets who I found very, very helpful. But I think my chief mentors would be probably poets I've read and loved, who I carry inside me. Can
you name a favorite?
Oh gosh, how many hours do we have? Well, of course, Shakespeare. I was raised on Shakespeare. My mother used to sing. She would sing Shakespeare songs.
Really?
Yeah, so I love the songs of Shakespeare as well as the plays. Of course, Keats. Of course, Yeats. Of course, Emily Dickinson. I have hundreds of mentors, that I love. And also some wonderful English high school teachers who loved Byron, which they read to us with great energy.
Shelley?
Shelley, yes. Chaucer, we had a teacher called Frank Goodrich. This was a Catholic high school who would make sure that there were no priests nearby, and he would read us all the rude parts of Chaucer that were left out of the Catholic editions of Chaucer.
The very old English.
Yes. So I've had lots of mentors, and I think it's hard to get by without them. You need voices murmuring their suggestions to you.
I think in the world of writing, as a non-writer, but just as an observer, probably mentors are more important than in some other fields. Because writing can be so self-oriented in a way, don't you think?
Yes, except you can always tell when someone writes who doesn't read. There's just a lot they don't know how to do. I'll give an example. My father was an organist, as was Stephen Paulus's father. And in an organ, maybe you have 3 keyboards, you have pedals, and you have all these stops that you pull out to create different effects. To create different effects.
Right.
And a writer who doesn't read is like playing with 2 fingers on 1 keyboard. They don't know how to draw out the range of the instrument. The only way you can really learn that is by loving different writers, absorbing them.
Would you notice too that their vocabulary was not as precise, not as nuanced?
Yeah.
They wouldn't choose the words you would choose?
Yes, the words are everything. The words are where the poems start. They don't usually start with ideas. You get a word and you start to see where it leads. So the only real way to learn to use words really well is to read them like crazy, read everything. The way a painter would love to look at other painters. You can't imagine a good composer who didn't love listening to, Bach and all the rest of them. So you learn from inside your craft ways to go about it, and then you sample it in your own writing.
As a little boy, were you a reader? Did your folks bring literature and books into the home?
They did, although it was more music than literature. My dad played the organ and the piano, and he sang. I sang in choirs.
Your mother sang Shakespeare?
My mother sang, and I used to act in plays a lot. When I was in college,
Why does that not surprise me?
I was very naughty in college. I spent 1 year at Oxford. I was in 7 plays in 1 year, so I think my studying suffered. But I had a sister who was an actress. I loved being a brother-in-law and nephews who were actors in England. So I found that teaching was a better way for me to be. I wasn't saying other people's words. I was saying my own words or reading poems I loved. But I also got to perform a little bit, because I think all good teachers have a touch of the performer.
Yes, I agree. Good teachers do.
Yeah.
You taught at the University of Minnesota English department 39 years.
Yes.
And you were head of the creative writing division for about 4 of those years.
Some of those years, yeah.
What kind of changes did you see in the thinking, the writing experiences of your students in those 39 years? To me, it seems like poetry has become much more of a popular thing now than it was 39 years ago.
I think it was always surprisingly popular, but maybe under the surface. I would get students off the range who'd come in writing like angels. I don't know how they ever learned it. So I don't think I know poetry is more performed now, in poetry slams and rap poetry and so forth. But from the beginning, it was alive and well in surprising places. So I don't think the love of poetry has gone away ever. It's an ancient art that satisfies some kind of thirst or hunger that we all have. And so I couldn't analyze it better than to say that it's always been, in my experience, something practiced and loved.
Would you honor us by reading one of your poems? Or I know you've also memorized many and might want to do that too, but right now, before we go any further, I think it'd be perfect timing to
happen to have a book right here.
Just happen.
I'll read you a little poem called The Now, the Long Ago, and it's a form. It's called a villanelle. It repeats lines in a pattern.
Okay.
And the most famous example of that would be by the great Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. There's a famous poem called Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night.
Yes.
Well, I very daringly used the same form. I wrote this when my daughter Nellie, our daughter, was almost 7 years old. So the you in the poem is a little girl.
Okay.
So it's called The Now, the Long Ago. In the dream time of the swarming snow, we're on the couch just chatting, you and I, here in the now, there in the long ago. The world outside is singular and slow, as if the winter taught all things to sigh in the dream time of the swarming snow. I'll make our supper, then we'll watch a show, and then you'll choose some stories by and by, here in the now, there in the long ago. So many things that you don't need to know about the years that simplify in the dream time of the swarming snow. This won't go on forever, child, although I've never had the words to tell you why, here in the now, there in the long ago. Won't be for always, little love. And so we'll take this all as blessing, you and I, in the dream time of the swarming snow, here in the now, there in the long ago.
Oh, that's just beautiful. I love it.
Thank you.
And you said a few minutes ago that poetry often begins with the words. But when I hear this, Michael, this to me is poetry coming out of feeling.
Well, it's a weave of many things. It's feeling, it's words, it's thoughts, it's rhythms, it's images. But a piece like that is deceptive. I'm not smart enough to sit and just write that. I probably wrote 30 versions of that.
I wondered how much you rewrite.
Many times.
Okay. Regularly?
Regularly.
Okay.
The composer John Harbison, who's still living, said once, I get my ideas down fast. I get an idea of the world of sound I want for a piece. But then I spend months finding out what my ear wants. So it's the ear that says this word and not that word. It's not non-intellectual, but it's primarily a physical love of the sound of the words.
That is such an intriguing idea to me, because I had not heard a poet say that before. I maybe missed, and they said it, and I didn't absorb it.
Yeah.
But I really thought thinking and feeling drove poetry.
Well, they do, but they drive them. But the words are the colors of the palette. It's like a painter. You can't imagine saying
That's a nice way to put
she's
it.
a terrific painter, but she doesn't have a very good sense of color.
Right.
You know, painters love color.
Yes.
And sculptors
Yes.
like to get their hands messy. So I like
Okay.
to get my hands into the words.
So when you say it that way, I understand better somehow.
Yeah.
You're very good with analogies. In terms of the process of writing, how do you do it? I interviewed Judith Guest years ago, and she talked about it as though it were quite a ponderous thing for her. Just sort of pulling out dialogue and pulling out ideas from her head in a way that sounded very hard in terms of hard work. Now it's hard work writing anything, I think, but tell us a bit about your process.
Well, Yeats very famously says that we must labor to be beautiful. So although the effect may be beautiful, there's a lot of work behind the scenes. And you just have to practice a lot until William James calls it wooing the combinations. You try this color with that color, this color with that color. W.H. Auden says it's like trying to remember a phone number, 378-4296-376, wooing the combinations. It's essentially an intuitive and playful activity. You can't sit down and will it. You have to empty yourself, create a spaciousness inside you, and then let anybody who wants to try out to be on the page. Gertrude Stein said once she learned from William James at Harvard to exclude nothing. That means at the initial workings of a piece, anybody, any word, any syllable, any image can try out to be in the poem.
So don't
Even if they can't
censor.
hold a tune, no restrictions. And then gradually it starts to form a kind of pattern. It constellates. You know, all those stars in the sky, but some stand out because they seem significant in how they're arranged, and we give them names. And I think of poems, this is not an original idea of mine, but I like the idea, poems that constellate things that weren't patterned before, and you make a new pattern with them. That villanelle is very much a pattern, because you have to repeat those lines at certain intervals.
And that's what really makes it especially charming, I think.
Yes.
You also used alliteration, swarming snow.
Yeah.
I'd never heard swarming with snow before. And I thought that was a interesting combination.
Well, I've always loved alliteration. My first book was called The Wife of Winter. Now, The Wife of Summer wouldn't be the same.
No.
So poets like to repeat themselves. Yes, swarming snow. We need to, as writers or as artists of any kind, they say we need to defamiliarize. We need to wash off the usual way people see words and see them in new ways, new combinations. Now, I tell you where swarming snow came from. I stole it from Hans Christian Andersen.
Really?
From The Snow Queen. I once dramatized The Snow Queen for the Children's Theatre back in the 70s. But at one point, the Snow Queen, and it's a great story, says, "The white bees are swarming." And she means it's snowing.
Oh, of course.
So maybe 30 years later when I wrote that, or 20 years, I stole from someone good. I stole from the master.
One of the best.
One of the best.
Yeah.
If you're going to steal. So a lot of borrowing goes on,
Of course.
or stealing.
Of course.
appropriating.
You are in love with poetry writing, but you also write other forms, as I said earlier. And you worked with the composer who we lost way too early, Stephen Paulus.
Yes.
And you were dear friends, it sounds like, and collaborators. What was it like in terms of the process? He wrote the music, you wrote the words.
It depends. For the oratorio, to be certain of the Dawn or other pieces, I had to write the words first. It's like writing a one-act play, and then the music comes in, and then Stephen would make huge changes. So for the longer pieces, the words come first. There were other times when he had a melody, and he said, "Can you give me some words? Can you make up some words to this melody?" One of our best-known pieces is called Pilgrim's Hymn, that many people sing. And there the music came first. And I walked around the neighborhood humming the words to myself and gradually getting the sounds that I wanted, finding out what my ear wants. Shall I give you an example of one of those?
That'd be great. And just for the viewers, again, To Be Certain of the Dawn is what we're going to hear some words from.
No, actually something else.
From Pilgrim's Hymn.
Not even that.
Oh, not even that.
Sorry to confuse you.
I am confused.
One time, Stephen said to me over at his house that Dale Warland had commissioned him to take an old tune and reharmonize it for a commission, and would I write the words? And it was a tune from the Southern Harmony Songbook of 1835, a lovely old tune. So Stephen played it on the piano, and I taped it in my little tape recorder. Then for several weeks I walked around humming it to myself and gradually wrote these words. So this is an old tune reharmonized with fresh words. It's called The Road Home.
Okay.
Tell me, where is the road I can call my own, that I left, that I lost so long ago? All these years I have wandered, oh, when will I know? There's a way, there's a road that will lead me home. After wind, after rain, when the dark is done, as I wake from a dream in the gold of day, through the air there's a calling from far away. There's a voice I can hear that will lead me home. Rise up, follow me, come away is the call. With the love in your heart is the only song. There is no such beauty as where you belong. Rise up, follow me, I will lead you home.
Beautiful. And that must have taken lots and lots of work. I mean, that is a complex combination, thoughts, feelings, words.
Yes, it took a few weeks, but I loved the tune right away. And I was feeling very emotional about a couple of things I don't need to go into, and it just came relatively easily. And it's become a very much performed and recorded song. It's a lovely one.
I love it. Now, this wonderful piece was nominated for the Pulitzer.
In music, yes.
In music. And you said that Stephen just got a Grammy for, tell me again.
Yes, Far in the Heavens. Stephen, a year after his death, a work called Far in the Heavens, recorded by a choral group led by Eric Holton in Arizona, it won the Grammy. And so there I was live streaming at home about 2 months ago, and there was Patty Paulus and Greg and Stephen Paulus coming down the aisle at this fancy theater in Hollywood to win the award. It means a lot. It was about 8 or 9 settings of poems that he organized around the theme of post 9/11. And it's a wonderful piece of music.
It must have, been such a thrill for them, of course, but for you, too, as his wonderful collaborator.
Yes.
When you give advice to young writers, and I'm sure there are a lot of young writers listening right now and viewing this, what do you say, Michael, in terms of what they should do to hone their skill?
Yeah. Well, that's a kind of a chordal question. There's a lot of things. Love what you do. Work really hard. Read everything. Be open. Philip Levine said once in a class of mine, a wonderful poet, don't defend your work unless you feel the criticism is being offered in bad faith. So be very open to suggestions from other people. But the main organ, apart from the ear, is the heart. You have to look into your heart and see what's necessary there that needs to be said. The mind, of course, is very important, and so is the ear. But Jack Cornfield, a great Zen writer, once said, if the work has no heart, it is useless. So I would say use your heart. It's a very intelligent organ.
And in a way, that is to me saying, listen to yourself.
Yes.
Don't be afraid of critics.
And don't censor yourself. Don't edit out things that are perhaps painful or difficult, that might upset people, because you have to have what Denise Levertov, another great poet, called fidelity to experience, which I deconstruct to mean your poem should be like your life. If you're a kind of a bawdy person, don't write, holy
Prim
poems.
and proper.
No, write bawdy poems. Often the best poems are a mixture of the bawdy and the holy.
Yes.
But fidelity to experience is what I would say. Be on the page who you are in your life, in your complex relationships. And always, always, always go to all the poetries. There's so much world poetry, so much poetry in translation that I wouldn't, that my own writing would be less without my knowing it. It's a bad sentence, I'm sorry. But I just owe so much to poets who never wrote in English, but I've read them sometimes in the original, but mostly in translation. There's everything to learn out there from poets like Pablo Neruda in Chile, and Wisława Szymborska in Poland, Nazim Hikmet in Turkey. Great writers.
Do you feel that reading them in their language, though, if you can get a good translation, gives you more insight, more appreciation, or is the English version of what they write good enough?
It has to be good enough, because I don't have any Turkish.
Well, yes, for many languages
I don't have
that
any
would
Polish.
be tricky.
Yeah, I do have French, and I know that my French is still good. I taught French in Iowa when I came over.
Really?
And, for a couple of years. I know that some poets like Baudelaire really don't exist in English.
I thought of his work
you
too.
can't get him really in English. You have to have it in French. Shelley in the Defense of Poetry says, it were as vain to cast a violet, the flower, into a crucible to try to distill its essence as it is to translate poetry. Which is a bit grand, really, but
that is quite grand, but it's great too.
But I love translation. It's taught me things I wouldn't know otherwise. I love poets whose language I don't understand. Isn't that a miracle?
Well, that's an interesting statement. Say that one more time for me.
I love poets and poems whose language, original language, I don't understand.
I see what
That's
you're
what
saying.
I meant.
Yes.
So someone like Robert Bly, our wonderful elder American poet, Minnesota poet, has a great book called The Winged Energy of Delight, and it's about 25 poets from all these languages that he has translated. It's like a Bible, almost. It's a treasury.
What are you writing right now? I know you've written children's books. We're going to show one of yours. The most recent book you've written, The Voices,
Yes.
A wonderful collection. But are you working on something hot and new right now?
I just finished something hot and new with this wonderful composer called Craig Heller Johnson. A big work called Considering Matthew Shepard, which is a 90-minute work based on this young man who was murdered in Wyoming in 1998. Just finished that, and that's been recorded.
A young gay man.
A young gay man, and it's a brilliant work. It'll be out in the fall.
And the musician is Craig?
Craig Heller Johnson, who will be in Minnesota soon doing a concert of Stephen's music.
Oh, wow.
Stephen Paulus, A Lyrical Life. But I'm working on a book of short poems. I'm collecting my shorter poems together. I'm working on a second book of essays. And I'm always ready to write words for music. If a composer who I admire and work with sends me a tune, I'll go to my little shed and start making something up.
I saw a picture of your little shed in your backyard.
It's pretty little.
And it looked very little.
I squeeze into this
It
cockpit.
looked kind of like an old Biffy, outdoor Biffy.
Well, thank you for that, Mary. Yes. It was made by a friend, for free, just out of nice scrap materials. And there's just room
for
me.
a desk?
Just room for a little desk and me, and I can sit there for hours.
I visited Thoreau's cabin, which I bet you might have seen.
No, but I've heard of it, of course.
And he had this great quote. He said, "This cabin is big enough. I have 3 chairs. One is for company, and the other 2 are for a crowd." And so
nice.
he really liked to write and be alone.
Henry David. I like to call him Harley Davidson Thoreau. I don't know why. Just the same initials.
I don't know if he'd like that.
No,
but
I think it's...
I want to just mention now, for those of you who are intrigued, and I'm guessing most of you are, and want to know more about this man, Michael Dennis Browne, he has a wonderful website. And on the website, there are collections of or examples of some of your poems. So go to www.michaeldennisbrowne.com. And I want to just mention, too, again, your most recently published work, The Voices, and
Dedicated to Stephen Paulus.
oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh. And then you mentioned just so briefly, and we don't have time to go into your work with essays, but another book called What the Poem Wants, Prose on Poetry. And this is a collection of essays about poetry.
Talks I gave and things I did when I taught, and I just kind of gathered them together. It was fun.
It looks intriguing. And then Give Her the River, a father's wish for his daughter. Wonderful, wonderful artwork in here. I'll quickly just...
That's my favorite.
Oh, I opened to the...
Good job.
Oh, this was synchronistic. A wonderful example of the artwork, and the artist was
Wendell
Miner.
And my images come from the West River Road, that's Mississippi, but his river is from the Chappaqua River in Connecticut, where he lives. So 2 different rivers combined in the book.
Intriguing. I've got to look at that. Well, thank you so much.
Pleasure, Mary.
It's been great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. I'll be back next week. Until then, have a good day, a good week, and check out his website. See you next week.